The church on Fifth Avenue gleamed like a crystal tomb. Every light, every candle, every polished marble tile seemed to conspire to blind her, to hide the truth that this was not a wedding, but a transaction. Amara Walker moved down the aisle, as if through a dream, her veil trembling with every step. The air was thick with white lilies and whispers. Somewhere behind her, she could still hear her father's voice from that morning broken, pleading. Just one ceremony. Baby, then it'll all be over. She had said nothing, because what could she say to a man drowning in his own debts ahead of her? Dominic Hayes stood waiting, impeccable in a charcoal suit, eyes as pale and distant as the Hudson in winter. Billionaire, industrial heir, the kind of man who made entire rooms fall silent when he entered, not because of respect, but because of the chill that followed him. Their gazes met for the briefest moment before the vows began. His didn't soften, hers didn't falter. The priest spoke, the choir sang, and Amara's hands shook only once when Dominic's fingers brushed hers. They felt like marble. When it came time for the vows, Dominic's voice was smooth, controlled. I, Dominic Hayes, take you. Amara Walker. The rest faded beneath the pounding of her heart. Then her turn came. I, Amara Walker. Her throat tightened. The words came out softer than she intended, but she finished them, because she had to, because pride was all she had left. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Dominic leaned in not to kiss her, but to whisper, his lips barely moving, "I will never touch you." The words fell like a blade, sharp, cold, final. A murmur rippled through the front pews. Amara didn't know if anyone had heard, but she felt them every gaze, every judgment. Her pulse roared in her ears. Shame, fury, and something far more dangerous surged together, boiling in her chest. He had made a vow of rejection in front of the world, and something inside her, something she had long kept quiet, snapped. She lifted her chin. The world narrowed to his face, the perfectly composed mouth, the pale eyes that had never trembled for anyone, and before her mind could catch up with her heart, she did the unthinkable. She kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was defiance fire against frost. The sound of gasps filled the church like the intake of a single, stunned breath. For a heartbeat. Dominic didn't move. He stood still, unyielding, like a statue of ice. But then something shifted. His hand, the one at his side, curled. His breath caught against her lips, and for one impossible second, the world disappeared. Then she pulled away. Silence. Even the choir seemed to stop breathing. Dominic's eyes, once so steady, flickered with something she couldn't name. Confusion, anger, desire. He said nothing, just stared at her, as if she'd rewritten a rule he didn't know could be broken. The priest cleared his throat, flustered. Cameras clicked. Guests whispered behind gloved hands. Somewhere in the back, a journalist's flash went off, freezing the moment forever, the kiss no one expected. Amara turned to face the crowd, her heart still hammering. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt alive. If he wanted to humiliate her, she had turned it on its head. But as she looked at him again, something inside her wavered. Dominic Hayes wasn't looking at her with the contempt she expected. His gaze was unreadable, dark in a way that unsettled her more than his coldness ever had. He offered his arm mechanically when it was time to walk down the aisle. She took it, because the cameras were still watching. His arm was tense beneath the smooth fabric of his suit. His pulse, steady but strong. Outside, the city stretched in winter gray. Photographers shouted their names. Flashes strobed like lightning. She kept her face composed, every movement graceful. He did the same, because that was what they did best, play the roles written for them. Inside the waiting limousine, silence pressed between them. The tinted glass sealed them off from the chaos outside. Dominic spoke first. What was that? His tone was quiet, but there was an edge to it like the moment before glass breaks. A kiss, she replied. It's what brides do. He turned to her. Don't mistake rebellion for courage. Mrs. Hayes. Amara met his gaze. And don't mistake pride for power. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, amusement. Maybe, but shadowed by something else. You think you can play this game, I think, she said evenly, that you underestimate how well I can survive it. They stared at each other for a long, suffocating moment. The city slid by in a blur of steel and snow outside the window. Finally, Dominic looked away, the tension in his jaw visible. You're here because your father made a deal he couldn't keep. Don't forget that. And you're here, she countered softly, because you need someone to clean your conscience in public. He didn't respond. His hands, folded on his knee, tightened just slightly. The rest of the ride passed in silence. When they reached the Hayes estate, a mansion of glass and stone on the edge of the Hudson, the night had deepened. The house glowed from within, beautiful and cold, like the man beside her. As they stepped inside, Amara's reflection followed her in the mirrored walls, a bride in ivory, but her eyes too fierce, too alive for the role. Margaret, the elderly housekeeper, greeted them with a soft smile. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. Dominic only nodded. Show Mrs. Mama Hayes to her room. Her room, not theirs. Margaret hesitated, eyes darting between them, then led Amara down the hall. When they reached the suite, Amara paused by the window. From there, she could see the river dark and endless. The city lights shimmered on the surface like broken stars. She thought of the kiss again, the look in his eyes when she pulled away. For a man so controlled, he had cracked for one breath, and that tiny fracture fascinated her more than it should have. She didn't want to think about why. A knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, Dominic stood there, still in his suit, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked at her for a moment, unreadable. You caught the press off guard. They're calling it the kiss that thawed the Ice King. Her lips twitched. You should be grateful. Makes you look human. Be careful, he said, stepping closer. You don't know the world you just stepped into. She met his gaze, chin high. Then maybe it's time someone shook it. For a long second, neither moved. The air between them thickened, alive with something neither could name. Then he said quietly, You're not what I expected. Amara's heart stumbled. Good. Expectations are boring. His mouth twitched just slightly. Not quite a smile. Sleep well, Mrs. Hayes. And he was gone. When the door clicked shut, she leaned against it, her breath shallow. Somewhere inside the mansion, she could hear the faint echo of footsteps measured, precise, like everything about him. She exhaled, turned toward the mirror, and unpinned her veil. It fell like snow to the floor. For a long time, she just looked at her reflection. A woman caught between two worlds, the chaos she came from and the cage she'd just entered. But in her eyes, there was something new. A spark. A dare. The kiss had been impulsive, reckless. But as she remembered the look on his face, the crack in his armor, she realized something profound. For all his power, Dominic Hayes wasn't untouchable. He could bleed. And maybe, just maybe, she was the one who had drawn the first drop. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, relentless, the kind that muffles sound, but not thought. Amara closed the curtains, the city lights fading behind her. Tomorrow would come with headlines, with gossip, with the weight of a marriage built on deceit. But tonight, there was silence. And in that silence, something fragile began to breathe. Not love. Not yet. Something smaller. Sharper. A beginning. The faint hum of the river below carried through the glass walls. Somewhere, deep inside the house, a door closed quietly. Neither of them knew it yet. But that sound, the soft click in the dark, was the start of everything that would undo them both. The house stood like a monument to silence. Glass walls rose toward the sky, reflecting the river below and the faint pulse of the city beyond. From the outside, it looked almost alive, light shifting along its surfaces like breath. But inside, it was still, sterile, too immaculate to belong to people who felt things. Amara woke before dawn. The unfamiliar quiet pressed against her ears, a sound so complete it became suffocating. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender and something colder, metallic, expensive, impersonal. She sat up slowly, her mind fogged by fragments of the night before the kiss. The flashes. Dominic's expression. That single phrase he'd left her with, "You're not what I expected." She didn't know whether it was a compliment or a warning. The room was vast and empty, its walls made of glass but still somehow impossible to see through. Beyond them stretched a frozen landscape of river and mist. It felt less like a home and more like an exhibit, a place where someone watched, but never touched. A flicker of motion in the reflection caught her eye. Dominic, downstairs, already dressed, already immaculate. Of course he was. He moved through his house like a man accustomed to ownership, each gesture measured, deliberate. The distance between them wasn't only emotional, it was architectural. This was his world, one built of transparency that revealed nothing. Amara drew the robe around her shoulders and stepped out into the hallway. The floor was polished stone. Her bare feet made no sound. Somewhere, coffee was brewing a scent too normal, too human for the rest of this place. When she entered the kitchen, Dominic looked up briefly from his tablet. "You're awake early?" His voice was calm, neither welcoming nor unkind, just neutral, as if they were colleagues sharing a hotel breakfast. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her tone careful. He gestured toward the counter. "There's coffee." "Margaret left breakfast. I'm not hungry." He nodded once, as if that answer was expected. He went back to his reading, but she could feel his attention flick toward her, like the ghost of a touch. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of the river beyond the glass. Finally, Amara said, "Is it always this quiet here?" Dominic didn't look up. "I like quiet." "I can tell," she said softly, taking the coffee. "It's beautiful and lonely." That made him pause. His eyes lifted to hers, cool and unreadable. "You get used to it. Or you pretend you do." Their gazes held. The tension between them was almost tangible. A taut thread neither dared to cut. He looked away first, the faintest crease forming at his brow. "You don't need to be here more than necessary. You'll have your own schedule, your own space. There are rules, discretion, appearances. Nothing more is required." "You mean I'm decoration?" she said quietly, "like the flowers you replace every week." His jaw tightened. "You misunderstand. No, I don't." She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint pulse at his throat. "I'm the wife people expect to see at your side. I play the part, smile on cue, look the way you want me to look. And in exchange, my father's name survives. You agreed to this." He reminded her. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. "But I didn't agree to disappear." Something in that sentence seemed to reach him. He said nothing for several seconds. Then quietly, "No one disappears here, Amara." They just fade into the glass. He left the room before she could respond. Later, when the house had gone still again, Amara wandered. Each hallway gleamed with polished steel and shadow. Paintings hung on the walls, abstract, muted, expensive, but none with life. Every line was calculated, every room symmetrical. It felt designed not for comfort, but control. She stopped before a large window overlooking the river. The glass was spotless, yet she could see her reflection, faintly superimposed over the skyline, a ghost within a cage of light. Her gaze drifted to a distant building on the opposite bank, a small art gallery she used to visit during college. She remembered standing there with charcoal-stained fingers, dreaming of someday seeing her name on a wall. That version of herself seemed impossibly far away. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. Just 2 words. "Thank you." She stared at the screen for a long time, the ache in her chest deepening. Gratitude and guilt, bound together. Then, another sound, the faint click of shoes on marble. She turned. Dominic stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. Expression unreadable. "You've been walking for an hour," he said. "Are you lost?" "Just looking," she replied, trying to understand what kind of man builds a house made entirely of glass. He raised an eyebrow. "You think it says something about me? I think it says everything," she murmured. A beat of silence. "People assume glass means transparency," he said, "but it doesn't. It means reflection. All you ever see is yourself." She studied him carefully. "And what do you see when you look?" He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "Control," he said at last. Amara smiled faintly. "That sounds exhausting. Not as exhausting as chaos." Their eyes met again, and for a brief moment, she saw something in him, a flicker of weariness. maybe even loneliness. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Dinner is at 8, he said, turning away. "Wear whatever you like. The board expects a photo release tomorrow. Of the happy couple," she said dryly. "Of the alliance," he corrected. When he left, Amara leaned against the window, the cold seeping through the glass and into her skin. She had thought marrying Dominic Hayes would feel like surrender. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of something vast, something dangerous, and she wasn't sure yet which of them would fall first. That night, the house changed. Lights dimmed automatically. The river shimmered under the moon, and the glass walls turned dark, mirroring the inside instead of the outside. Amara walked barefoot through the quiet halls, her reflection following like a shadow she couldn't shake. She passed the library, its shelves precise, every book untouched. On the desk sat a single photograph in a silver frame, a woman she didn't recognize. Blonde hair, soft eyes, smiling. Amara stared at it, a strange unease stirring. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Dominic stood in the doorway, his face unreadable in the dim light. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Who is she?" He hesitated. "No one you need to know. Someone you lost," she guessed. He didn't deny it. "Go back to your room, Amara." She held his gaze, steady. You can't keep ghosts locked behind glass. Dominic. His expression flickered. For the first time, his composure cracked, not by anger, but by something closer to pain. He took a step forward, voice low. "You think you know me because of one kiss in a church. You don't. You don't know what that kiss cost." "Then tell me," she said, equally soft. He stopped, inches away, and for a breathless moment, the air between them trembled. His scent, cedar, whiskey, distance wrapped around her. His eyes searched hers, as if he might find something there he'd long stopped believing in. But instead of speaking, he turned away. "Good night, Mrs. Hayes." She watched him leave, his reflection dissolving into the dark glass, like smoke. When he was gone, Amara stood alone before the photograph. The woman's smile seemed to fade under the shadows. For the first time, she realized the cracks in this perfect house weren't in the walls. They were in the man who built it. Hours later, she couldn't sleep. From her window, the city shimmered faintly, alive in ways this house would never be. Below, she saw a light still burning in his study. Dominic. Of course, always working, always awake. On impulse, she wrapped her robe tighter and went downstairs. He didn't notice her at first. He was leaning over his desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on a contract. But there was something different in his posture tension that looked more like fatigue. "You should rest," she said softly. He looked up, startled but composed. "I don't sleep easily." "Neither do I," she admitted. He set the pen down, studied her. "You're not afraid of me. Should I be?" He almost smiled. "Most people are." "I'm not most people," she said. "I'm beginning to see that." A silence stretched between them thick, not uncomfortable, but charged. He glanced toward the window, where their reflections hovered side by side in the glass. "You'll find this place colder than you expect." I grew up with cold, she said, but I also learned how to make fire. For the first time. Dominic laughed, a low, surprised sound, brief and real. It startled both of them. And just like that, something shifted again. The air softened. He said nothing more. She didn't leave. They simply stood there, two strangers bound by a name, surrounded by walls that reflected only fragments of who they were. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow, deliberate, endless. Amara watched the flakes dissolve against the glass. It's strange, she murmured. You build a house of windows, but no one really sees you. Dominic's gaze followed hers. Maybe that's the point. She turned toward him, her voice almost a whisper. Or maybe it's the problem. He didn't answer. But when she left the study, she felt his eyes follow her until the last echo of her footsteps faded. And in that quiet, Dominic Hayes realized, perhaps for the first time, that the woman he thought would simply fit into his world might be the one to fracture it completely. Upstairs. Amara paused by her window once more. The city's lights flickered in the river below, restless and alive. Somewhere beneath the still surface of this glass house, something had begun to crack, something that would not stop until it broke open the heart of them both. The Hudson glimmered like a sheet of glass beneath the pale moon. Inside, the house slept, or pretended to. Amara lay awake, eyes tracing the ceiling's faint reflections. Every sound in this place felt amplified, the hum of the heater, the whisper of snow against the window, her own restless breath. Since the night in his study, she hadn't seen Dominic again. Not at breakfast, not through the mirrored halls. Margaret said he'd flown to Boston for a meeting, but even in absence, he lingered, his scent on the stairs, his voice echoing in the spaces between silence. She got up, unable to stay in bed any longer. Downstairs, the lights glowed dimly, a soft gold against the glass. She walked barefoot into the living room, the marble cold beneath her skin. The fireplace, untouched since the wedding, was still stocked with logs. She hesitated only a second before lighting it. The crackle broke the silence. Warmth spread through the room, softening the hard edges of the walls. For the first time since she'd arrived, the house felt almost human. She curled into the couch, watching the flames. And then, almost unconsciously, she began to sketch. There was always a pencil in her pocket, a habit she'd never broken. She drew without thinking the lines of the house, the river, the man who haunted both. Dominic's face emerged from the shadows of her strokes, sharp, beautiful, unreadable. But there was something else now, something she hadn't seen at first: weariness. The kind that came from holding too much, for too long. She was shading his eyes when the door opened. I thought I was the only one who couldn't sleep. His voice was rougher than usual, less controlled, more human. She turned. Dominic stood at the threshold, jacket in hand, snow melting from his hair. He looked tired, the kind of tired that money couldn't fix. "You're back," she said quietly. He nodded, his gaze falling to the fire. "It seems you've found a way to make the house less cold." It was suffocating, she admitted. "I needed to breathe." He stepped closer, the light catching his face. "Do I suffocate you too?" The question startled her. "Sometimes," she said honestly. "But I think you suffocate yourself more." For the first time. Dominic smiled, not the polite, public smile of a man who owned everything, but a small, fragile curve of the lips. You might be right. He dropped his jacket onto a chair, then glanced at her sketchpad. What are you drawing? Nothing, she said quickly, tucking it against her leg. He moved closer, and before she could protest, he plucked it from her hands. His expression shifted as he looked. I don't usually like how I look, he murmured. But this. His eyes flicked up to hers. You make me look alive. Her heart gave a soft, traitorous lurch. I didn't mean to. I know. He handed the sketch back. That's what makes it worse. Their eyes met across the flickering firelight. Neither looked away. The air between them seemed to pulse with something unspoken, too fragile to name, too dangerous to ignore. Dominic sat down opposite her, his movements slower now, less rehearsed. You said once you didn't agree to disappear, he said quietly. I've been thinking about that. Have you? He nodded. I built this house because I wanted control, transparency, no shadows. But somehow, the more glass I added, the darker it became. Because you can't build walls out of fear, she said softly, even if they're made of light. He studied her, the reflection of the fire dancing in his eyes. How is it you always say the one thing I don't want to hear? Maybe it's the only thing that needs to be said. He leaned back, exhaling. You talk like you've lived 100 lives. Maybe I have, she whispered. Or maybe I've just had to grow up faster than most. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the fire, and outside, the soft fall of snow. Then, quietly, he said, she died here. You know. Amara froze. The woman in the photograph. Dominic nodded, gaze fixed on the flames. Her name was Elise. She was my fiancée, 2 years ago. The glass staircase, he gestured toward the spiral of crystal that rose from the center of the room. She slipped. It was raining. I should have been there. Amara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. He shook his head. Don't be. It wasn't your fault. But it wasn't yours either. He didn't answer. His jaw worked as if he were swallowing words that refused to go down. Amara hesitated, then said softly, Is that why you said you'd never touch me? His eyes lifted, startled, for a heartbeat. She saw something raw in them. Fear. Guilt. Grief. He looked away. I didn't want another ghost. The words hung between them, heavy and fragile. Without thinking, Amara reached out, her hand resting lightly on his. His skin was cold, almost trembling. He didn't pull away. I'm not her, she said. I know. His voice broke on the edge of the word. That's the problem. For a moment, neither moved. The fire crackled. The snow whispered. Then Dominic stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I'm sorry, he said after a long silence. This wasn't supposed to be anything more than a deal. And yet here we are, talking about ghosts in the middle of the night. Amara rose slowly. Maybe that's what happens when you lock 2 living things in a glass cage. They start to see their reflections. He turned. A shadow of something, fear, longing crossing his face. And what do you see when you look at me? She hesitated, then said, "A man who's terrified of feeling anything real. He didn't deny it. And you? A woman who's tired of pretending she doesn't." The silence that followed was unbearable and electric all at once. Dominic took a step toward her. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the hard lines. "You should hate me," he whispered. "Maybe I do," she breathed, "but not enough to stop wanting to understand you." That undid him, in 2 strides. He was close enough for her to feel his breath. His hand rose, hesitated in the air between them, then fell away. He turned instead, back to the glass. "I can't," he said, more to himself than to her. "I know." Amara picked up her sketchpad, clutching it to her chest. Her heart hurt in ways she hadn't expected. He was right there, and yet impossibly far away. She started toward the stairs, but his voice stopped her. "Amara." She turned. "When you kissed me in the church." His gaze held hers. "I wasn't angry because you embarrassed me. I was angry because I felt something I wasn't ready to feel." Her breath caught. And now, he didn't answer immediately. "Now I'm terrified. It's still there." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. 2 people bound by accident and choice, by what they'd lost and what they hadn't yet dared to want. Then she whispered, "Maybe some ghosts don't come to haunt us. Maybe they come to remind us we're still alive." He didn't move, but something in his eyes just barely softened. She left him there, standing before the glass, the fire flickering behind her like a pulse. Upstairs, the house felt different, not warmer, exactly, but awake. Amara closed the door, her reflection ghosting across the window pane. Snowflakes pressed against the glass like silent witnesses. She opened her sketchpad again, tracing over the lines she'd drawn before. But now, she added something new, the faint suggestion of 2 figures beside the fire. Their faces turned toward each other, but not touching. Between them, light. When she finally set the pencil down, she smiled faintly. For the first time, the house didn't feel quite so hollow. Below, she could hear him moving, pacing, perhaps, or standing still in front of the same flames. Neither of them slept that night, but for the first time, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of things unspoken, fragile truths, waiting for daylight. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, blanketing the glass world in white, and somewhere within it, something that had long been frozen began, quietly, to thaw. Dawn came like a sigh. The glass house was drenched in pale gold, the kind of light that softened even its sharpest corners. The fire from the night before had long gone out, but a trace of warmth still clung to the air as if the walls themselves remembered. Amara stood by the window, barefoot, coffee in hand. Outside, the river gleamed with slow-moving silver. Snow still lined the banks, melting into thin mist that blurred the horizon. She hadn't slept much, though she couldn't call it insomnia. It was something else, an ache of awareness. The conversation from last night still echoed inside her, Dominic's voice cracking when he said, "I didn't want another ghost." The way his eyes had looked, not cold, but human, breakable. She didn't know what to do with that knowledge. The house was quiet again, too quiet. But now the silence felt different, not the kind that smothered, but the kind that waited. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. Dominic stood in the doorway, tie loose, hair slightly disheveled, almost imperfect, and therefore impossibly magnetic. He stopped when he saw her, the faintest hint of surprise crossing his face. "I didn't expect you to be up this early," he said. "I didn't expect you to be human," she replied before she could stop herself. He blinked, then astonishingly laughed. A real laugh this time, low and unguarded. It startled her, warmed her, unsettled her. "Fair enough," he said. "Coffee." "I already made some." She gestured toward the pot. "Black. No sugar." "Right." His brow lifted. "You've been studying me, just observant." He poured a cup, his movements slower than usual, deliberate. For a moment, the domesticity of it, the billionaire in shirt sleeves, the woman he barely knew making coffee, felt almost absurdly intimate. Dominic leaned against the counter, studying her as he took a sip. "You didn't sleep." "Neither did you," she said softly. He didn't answer, but she caught the briefest flicker in his eyes, an acknowledgement, a shared truth. For a few minutes, they simply stood there in the morning light, drinking coffee and pretending they were two ordinary people beginning an ordinary day. Then he said, almost casually, "I have to meet the board this afternoon. They'll want to see us together." "Us?" "Yes. Appearances still matter, especially after that headline." She arched a brow. "You mean the kiss that melted the Ice King?" He groaned softly, setting the cup down. "They're insufferable." Amara smiled. "A quiet, mischievous thing. You're the one who married an artist, Dominic. Drama comes free of charge." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression softened. "I didn't realize until now how much this house needed laughter." "Careful," she teased. "You might start enjoying it." He almost smiled, but the moment broke when his phone buzzed. The sound seemed to pull him back into his armor. He glanced at the screen, jaw tightening. "Business?" she asked. "Family," he said curtly. "My father." Something in his tone made her hesitate. "He doesn't approve of this. He doesn't approve of anything that makes me appear human." She studied him for a moment. "And yet you still try to please him." His eyes flicked to hers, sharp, defensive. Then, softer old habits. Amara nodded, understanding more than she should. "I know what it's like to owe someone everything, and still feel like you've already paid too much." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was knowing. Then Dominic straightened, smoothing his tie, slipping the mask back into place. "I'll have the car ready at noon. You might want to wear something that says, Mrs. Hayes, instead of rebellious spirit of the Bronx." Her lips curved. "I'll see what I can do." The board luncheon was held at the Astoria, a place so polished it almost gleamed. Crystal chandeliers reflected on every glass surface. The room itself felt like an extension of Dominic's house, controlled, immaculate, cold. They walked in together, cameras flashing. Dominic's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, guiding, protective, or simply performative, she couldn't tell. He was flawless as always. Voice smooth as silk when he greeted his directors. His charm precise and professional. Amara played her part, smiling, nodding, saying little. But every now and then, she caught him glancing at her as if to check that she was still there, still real. At one point, an older man leaned toward her, voice oily with politeness. "You must find all this overwhelming, Mrs. Hayes. The adjustment. I mean." Amara smiled sweetly. "I've learned that comfort and loneliness often share the same address." The man blinked, taken aback. Dominic's mouth twitched, the ghost of amusement, quickly hidden. When they finally escaped to the balcony, she exhaled in relief. "Do they always talk like that?" "Only when they want something," Dominic said, "which is always. You handle them well." "It's a performance," he admitted. "One I perfected a long time ago." She studied him, the city skyline reflected in his eyes. "Then who are you when you're not performing?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, quietly, "Someone I don't recognize anymore." Her heart squeezed. "Maybe you should start." He turned to look at her, and the way the sunlight hit him soft, uncertain, made her chest ache. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," she said, "but it's possible." Dominic looked away first, eyes fixed on the river in the distance. "You shouldn't care this much." "I don't know how not to." The words slipped out before she could stop them. They hung between them, fragile and terrifying. He opened his mouth, as if to respond, but a voice from behind interrupted them. "Dominic." One of the board members called. A word. He hesitated, eyes flicking back to her. "We'll finish this later." But when he walked away, she had the distinct feeling that later might never come. The afternoon stretched long, back at the house. Amara retreated to the studio Dominic had converted for her, a space filled with light and unfinished canvases. She painted for hours, losing herself in color, in motion. But no matter what she tried to create, his face kept finding its way into the paint. Not literally just in the emotion. The tension between warmth and restraint. When the sun began to set, she realized she hadn't eaten. She went downstairs, only to find Dominic in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, trying and failing to slice bread without ruining it. She stopped in the doorway, watching. "I didn't know billionaires cooked," she said softly. He looked up, caught off guard. "I don't. Margaret's gone for the evening, and I was experimenting with bread, with humility." She laughed, the sound filling the kitchen like music. "You're terrible at it." He grinned, an actual grin this time, crooked and boyish. Apparently. Amara stepped closer, taking the knife from his hand. Their fingers brushed just barely, but it was enough. She sliced a clean piece, handed it to him. "See? Not that hard." He looked at her, and something shifted again. "You make it look easy," he said quietly. She glanced up. "What?" "Living feeling." The air between them thickened. Her heart beat too fast. "You're learning," she whispered. He set the bread down. "I'm trying." There was a pause, small, fragile, infinite. Then his phone buzzed again. He looked at it, frowned. "It's my father." "Answer it," she said, stepping back. "I'll clean up." He hesitated, then left the room. Amara turned to the sink, but her hands trembled. She could hear his voice in the distance, low, controlled, angry. She couldn't make out the words, only the tone. When he came back, his expression was darker. "What happened?" she asked. He poured a drink, swallowed it hard. "He's planning to dissolve the foundation, the art fund, the one that supports local schools," he nodded. "He says it's a waste of money. That art doesn't fix anything." Amara's chest tightened. "You disagree?" "Of course I do," he snapped, then softened immediately. "Sorry, I've spent my whole life proving I'm not him, but every time I think I've built something different, he finds a way to remind me I haven't." She reached for him instinctively, then stopped herself. "Maybe that's why you married me." He looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "Because I'm everything he hates." She smiled faintly. "Color, chaos, feeling." Dominic exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh. "You might be right. Then don't waste it," she said softly. "Don't waste me." Their eyes met, the words hanging there like the first spark of something inevitable. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But his hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Amara. Then stop running from the ones you already made," she whispered. He held her gaze for a long, aching second. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the faint scent of whiskey and something warmer in his wake. Amara stood there, pulse still racing, knowing that something had shifted between them, something irreversible. Outside, the sky deepened into indigo. Inside, the last rays of sun broke against the glass walls, scattering light like fragments of truth. Neither of them were ready to face. Upstairs, in the studio, her latest painting waited on the easel, two figures standing in a room of glass, their shadows touching before their hands ever did. Beneath it, in small letters, she wrote one word: becoming. It began with silence, the kind that wasn't empty, but charged like the air before rain. For days after their argument in the kitchen, Dominic kept his distance. He left early, returned late, carrying the cold with him like armor. Amara didn't chase him. She painted instead furiously, endlessly, until the studio smelled of turpentine and sleeplessness. Her canvases had changed. Where there had once been control, symmetry, and muted tones, now there was chaos, streaks of crimson, gold, indigo colliding like storm fronts. When she painted, she didn't think of him. And yet, he was everywhere, in the shadows, in the rhythm of her brush, in the way her pulse quickened at the sound of footsteps that weren't his. Sometimes, at night, she thought she heard him outside the studio door. The faint pause, the retreat. He never entered. Until he did. It was a Wednesday morning, gray and still. Snow flurried past the window, soft as breath. Amara was cleaning her brushes when Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Hayes," the housekeeper said, her eyes kind but curious. "Mr. Hayes asked me to give you this." She handed over an ivory envelope sealed with gold wax. Inside, a note written in Dominic's meticulous handwriting. "Meet me at noon. Bring nothing but your coat." That was all. No explanation. Amara hesitated, Dominic wasn't a man who invited. He ordered, negotiated, commanded, but this sounded different, almost gentle. At exactly noon, a black car waited outside. The driver said nothing. The city unfolded beyond the glass, gray towers rising through the mist. The silence inside the car felt fragile, like something about to change. When they stopped, she looked out the window and gasped. It was a building she knew well, a warehouse in Brooklyn's old art district. Years ago, it had been her sanctuary, the place where she'd spent long nights painting under flickering lights, surrounded by other dreamers, too broke to give up. The driver opened the door. "Mr. Hayes is waiting inside." The warehouse had been transformed. Sunlight poured through the high windows, catching on easels, brushes, and canvases stacked neatly along the walls. Fresh paint gleamed in jars of every color. In the center stood a long oak table draped in linen, scattered with new sketchbooks, blank and waiting. Amara stood frozen. The air smelled like oil and rain and possibility. Dominic was by the window, sleeves rolled up, his usual precision replaced by something more hesitant. He turned when he heard her. "You built this," she said softly. "I restored it," he corrected. "It was abandoned. Margaret said you used to work here." Her voice wavered. "How did you?" I asked. He stepped closer, searching her face. "You said once this house was too quiet. I thought maybe this would sound more like you." She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The studio wasn't polished like the glass house. It was raw, alive, full of light and shadow. Her fingers trembled as she touched the wooden table, the smooth curve of a brush handle. "You remembered," she whispered. "I remember everything you say," he admitted. Her heart thudded painfully. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I stopped listening to people a long time ago, and then you came along, and suddenly I couldn't stop. For a moment, the world shrank to the space between them, the smell of paint, the faint echo of their breath." Amara blinked back the sting in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." He paused. "But I wanted to." She looked at him then, really looked. The man who had built walls of glass and called them safety, who had spoken of ghosts and silence, now stood before her surrounded by color. And she understood this wasn't a gift of apology. It was a confession. They spent the afternoon there, not talking much. Dominic watched as she unpacked paints and tested brushes, as though he were afraid to disturb something sacred. When she finally started to paint, the first stroke came easy, like breathing. He sat nearby, reading, though she could feel his gaze flick to her every few minutes. The light changed as the hours passed. Golden, then pink, then the quiet gray of evening. At one point, he said, "You look different when you paint." She didn't look up. "Different how alive," he said simply. She smiled faintly. "And you look different when you stop pretending you don't care." He met her eyes, unflinching. "Maybe I'm learning." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was warm, familiar, almost tender. When she finally set the brush down, her hands were streaked with blue and gold. The canvas before her was unfinished, but it pulsed with emotion, an abstract whirl of light breaking through shadow. Dominic approached quietly. What is it? Not what? She said. Who? He frowned. Who? Then you. She answered. He stilled. It's not finished, she added quickly, flustered. It's just how I see you. He studied the painting. It's nothing like me. Yes, she said softly. That's the point. He turned to her, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her. The air between them thinned. His gaze dropped to her mouth. But then he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. I should drive you home, he murmured. Amara's chest ached. You built me a studio, Dominic. But I think you're the one who needs to start painting. He gave a faint, broken laugh. Maybe someday. The car ride back was quiet, though not cold. Their shoulders brushed once, and neither moved away. When they reached the house, snow had begun again, delicate as dust. Amara reached for the door handle, but his voice stopped her. Wait. She turned. He hesitated, eyes searching hers. I don't know what this is becoming, he said, but it's different. You're different. Her throat tightened. So are you. He nodded slowly. That's what scares me. Before she could respond, he leaned forward not to kiss her, but to rest his forehead briefly against hers. It was the gentlest touch imaginable, barely there. Yet it sent a tremor through her entire body. When he pulled away, his eyes were unreadable again, but softer somehow. Good night, Amara. She smiled, voice trembling. Good night, Dominic. Later, in her room, she found another note on her nightstand. It wasn't signed. Just 3 words written in his neat, deliberate hand. Color suits you. She pressed the paper to her chest, her heartbeat echoing in the quiet. Something inside her had shifted, opened. But even as warmth bloomed in her chest, a warning stirred. Dominic Hayes was not a man who loved easily. Every gesture meant something. Every silence, even more. And if he was beginning to fall, she knew it wouldn't be gently. The next morning, she returned to the studio alone. The air still carried traces of him, the faint scent of cedar and smoke, the memory of laughter where there had once been only echo. She sat before the unfinished canvas, brush poised. The colors waited, alive, restless. When she began to paint again, her hands no longer trembled. Each stroke was a question she didn't yet know how to ask. By the time she stopped, the figure in the painting had changed. The man of shadow had turned toward the light, and in the corner, almost hidden in the paint, she added something new, a small, bright streak of gold, shaped like a door opening. Outside, the sky cleared. The first sunlight in weeks spilled across the river, glinting off the house of glass on the hill. Inside, a woman painted, and a man upstairs stared at the same horizon, each unaware that they were both thinking the same thing, maybe. After all, there was still something worth saving. The city glittered that night, wrapped in the glamour of winter. Strings of light draped across Fifth Avenue, champagne-colored and endless, reflecting on wet asphalt and limousine glass. The annual Hayes Foundation Gala had arrived, the first since their marriage. And the first time Amara would step into Dominic's world, not as a rumor, but as a reality. She stared at herself in the mirror. The gown was silk, pale gold, simple yet magnetic. It wasn't something she would have chosen before, too refined, too still, but it moved like light when she walked. Margaret fastened the clasp of her necklace, murmuring, "You look radiant." Mrs. Hayes, radiant. The word felt foreign. She smiled faintly, but her reflection didn't. Beneath the shimmer, she felt that familiar edge of uncertainty, the question that never left her since the wedding. Who was she in his world? When Dominic appeared at the doorway, even the mirror seemed to hesitate. He wore a black tuxedo, immaculate as ever. But there was something different tonight, the faintest trace of warmth beneath the precision. His gaze moved from her face to the necklace, to the slow rise and fall of her breath. "You're—" He stopped, searching for a word that fit. "Presentable," she teased softly. He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Dangerous." The silence stretched, alive with electricity. Neither dared to name. Then he offered his arm, formal, composed. "Shall we?" The ballroom at the Astoria was a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers glowed like constellations. The floor gleamed beneath soft violins, and every face in the room turned as they entered. The Ice King and his thaw. Someone whispered. Amara heard it, but didn't flinch. She smiled slow, deliberate, like a woman who had learned how to turn vulnerability into armor. Dominic's hand settled lightly at her back, and she felt the steadiness of his touch even through the fabric. Cameras flashed. The crowd swelled. He leaned close, murmuring against her ear, "Remember, if it gets too much, breathe. Just breathe." The intimacy of his voice, barely audible over the music, undid something inside her. She nodded, wordless. They moved together through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, shaking hands. To the outside world, they were perfection poised, unshakable, the empire and its queen. But beneath the facade, Amara could feel the storm brewing in the quiet spaces between words, because tonight wasn't only about charity. It was about power and appearances and ghosts that refused to stay buried. She saw her before he did, Elise Beaumont, Dominic's former fiancée's sister, tall, elegant, with eyes like frost. Amara had seen her in photographs, smiling beside Dominic years ago, before the accident that changed everything. Now Elise crossed the room like a memory resurrected, every step deliberate. She reached them just as the music shifted, her smile practiced and razor sharp. "Dominic," she said smoothly, taking his hand. "It's been too long." "Elise." His tone was polite, distant. "I didn't know you were back in New York." "I returned last month." Paris grows dull without tragedy to write about. Her gaze slid to Amara, assessing. "And this must be the new Mrs. Hayes." Amara extended her hand. "Amara." Elise's smile deepened, just enough to sting. "Of course, the artist." There was a pause, thin, brittle, before Dominic said, "Elise is curating a show next spring." "Ah," Amara replied lightly. "So we're both in the business of beauty and illusions." Elise's brow arched, the faintest smirk forming. Some illusions last longer than others. The tension between the three of them was invisible to everyone else. But Amara could feel it sharp and cold, like the edges of broken glass. Dominic's hand at her back tensed. "Elise," he said quietly, "enjoy the evening." She inclined her head. "All grace and ice. Always do." Then she vanished into the crowd, leaving perfume and memory in her wake. Later, Amara escaped to the terrace, her heart still pounding. The night air was cold, sharp enough to bite. City lights shimmered below like a restless sea. She gripped the railing, exhaling slowly. She wasn't jealous, not exactly. It wasn't Elise herself. But what she represented everything Amara wasn't. The life before, the woman before, the world Dominic had tried to bury. Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. "You shouldn't have to deal with that," Dominic said quietly. "She wasn't cruel," Amara replied. "Just honest." "She was manipulative." "Maybe. But she wasn't wrong." He frowned. "About what?" "That I don't belong here." He moved closer. The air between them charged. "Don't say that." She turned, eyes meeting his. "You built this world out of glass and control, Dominic. I'm not made of either. And every time I start to think maybe I fit, someone like her appears to remind me I don't." His voice lowered. "You fit more than anyone ever has. Then why do I feel like I'm still looking through the window?" For a moment, his composure cracked. "Because I don't know how to open the door." Something inside her broke at that. The honesty, the helplessness. "Then learn," she whispered. He stepped closer, so close she could feel his breath. "And if I hurt you trying?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Then at least it would mean you finally touched me." The words hung there, trembling, for a heartbeat. She thought he might kiss her, but then the sound of laughter from inside shattered the moment. He stepped back, every wall snapping back into place. Amara's heart clenched. She turned away, pretending to look at the skyline. "You're very good at disappearing in plain sight." Dominic Hayes. He exhaled slowly. "And you're very good at seeing things you shouldn't." When he left, she stayed where she was until the cold seeped through her skin. By the time they returned home, silence sat between them like a wall. Dominic loosened his tie, avoiding her gaze. "You shouldn't let Elise get under your skin." "She didn't," Amara said, though her voice betrayed her. He looked at her then, weary. "You think I'm still in love with a ghost? I think you're still haunted by one," she replied. "And maybe you don't know the difference." He closed his eyes briefly, as if the truth hurt more than he expected. "It's not what you think. Then what is it?" He hesitated too long. "That's what I thought," she said quietly, stepping past him. But before she reached the stairs, his voice stopped her. "She saved me once," he said softly, "from becoming the man my father wanted. And then she died, and I became him anyway." Amara froze. He continued, quieter still. "You're the first person who's ever made me wonder if I could be someone else again." Her heart stuttered. "Dominic." He turned toward her, eyes raw. "But I don't know how to be that man without breaking everything I built." She took a step closer, trembling. "Then maybe it's time to let something break." For a moment, Neither moved. The air pulsed with something dangerous, something real. Then he said, almost a whisper, "You should go to bed. Is that an order? A plea?" Amara nodded, unable to speak. She walked away, but his voice followed her like a ghost. "Good night, Amara." In her room, she stood before the window, watching snow begin to fall again. The reflection in the glass showed a woman caught between light and shadow, not the girl who had been sold to save a name, not yet the woman who could save a man like him. Somewhere below, Dominic's study light burned through the night, steady and lonely. She turned back to her sketch pad and began to draw. Fast, fierce, unthinking. By the time dawn touched the sky, she had filled the page with the same two figures standing apart, reaching for each other through walls of glass. But this time, the glass had begun to crack, and far below the hill, in the dark city hum, Elise Beaumont made a call, her voice calm, deliberate. "Yes," she said. "Tell him I've found the weakness. It's her." The storm came without warning. Rain lashed against the glass house, hard and relentless, like the world had decided to test its strength. Inside, everything looked untouched still. Perfect, but the air had changed. It was charged, heavy with the kind of silence that precedes collapse. Amara stood in the studio, her hands stained with paint that refused to dry. The canvas before her was chaos red, bleeding into black, shapes that meant nothing and everything. She hadn't painted for 3 days, not since the gala, not since Elise. Dominic had been gone since dawn. Meetings, he said, but she knew better. He always left when emotions started to breathe too loud. She set the brush down and crossed to the window. Through the rain, she could see his car pulling up the drive, sleek, black, faceless. He stepped out without an umbrella, the storm soaking him instantly. He didn't care. He looked like a man walking through punishment. Amara didn't move. By the time he entered the house, the rain had turned to mist. She heard the distant sound of his shoes on marble, his voice low as he said something to Margaret, then quiet again. He appeared in the doorway a minute later. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the space between them filled with everything they hadn't said. "You're drenched," she said softly. He ignored that. "We need to talk." Those words never meant anything good. Amara folded her arms. "Then talk." Dominic took a slow breath, the kind that steadied more than lungs. "Elise came to my office. I figured she might. She's planning to leak a story." Amara's heart dropped. "About what?" "About you. About us." He hesitated. "She found out about your father. The debt. The arrangement." The words struck harder than the rain outside. "How? I don't know. Maybe through the firm. Maybe my father. Of course. The elder Hayes. The ghost behind the curtain." Amara laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. "So that's what I am to her, leverage. To him, collateral. And to you, don't," he said sharply. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Why not? You built this cage, Dominic. I just learned how to live inside it. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Then, how was it supposed to be?" He didn't answer. His silence was worse than any lie. "Right," she whispered. "You don't know." He took a step forward, voice low, strained. Amara, I can stop this. I can make her disappear from the story. How I'll pay her off, or threaten her if I have to. Her jaw tightened. You'll control it like everything else. I'm trying to protect you. By owning me. The air snapped like lightning. He closed his eyes, exhaling through his teeth. You think I don't see what she's doing? Elise wants me to break, to lose you. I won't give her that satisfaction. Her chest ached at the word lose. It was the first time he'd said it, the first hint that she meant more than circumstance. But still, she asked quietly, do you even know what it means to lose someone? His gaze hardened. Don't. You hide behind control, Dominic, behind glass and money and silence. You think that keeps you safe, but it just makes you empty. He stepped closer, anger flickering in his eyes, not at her, but at himself. You think I haven't tried to change. You think I don't wake up every damn day, trying not to become the man who built this house. Then stop building walls, she cried. Let someone in. The room pulsed with their breathing harsh, uneven, alive. I let you in, he said finally, almost a whisper. It was the softest confession he had ever made, and the cruelest. Amara's throat tightened. Then why does it still feel like I'm standing outside? He didn't answer, not with words, but his eyes said everything. The longing, the fear, the weight of a man who didn't know how to love without breaking something. And she realized, with sudden clarity, that love wasn't the problem. It was the cage they'd built around it. That night, the storm deepened. Thunder rolled across the river, shaking the glass walls. Dominic was in his study, pacing, calling lawyers, trying to contain a truth that refused to stay hidden. Amara stood in the hallway, listening to the muffled fragments of his voice. Words like damage, reputation, conflict of interest. Not once did he say her name. When the door finally opened, he looked exhausted, eyes shadowed, shirt half unbuttoned. It's handled, he said. What does that mean? It means Elise won't speak. You paid her. He didn't deny it. It's done. She laughed softly, bitterly. You think silence fixes everything, don't you? It keeps us alive. No. Dominic, she said, voice trembling. It keeps you comfortable. There's a difference. He took a step toward her. I did this for you. No. You did it for control. Her words hit him like impact. He flinched, subtle, but real. Amara. She shook her head, tears burning. You built me a studio, gave me colors, made me feel like maybe I could breathe again. And then you turn around and decide who I get to be. That's not love. That's survival. Maybe survival is all I know. Then maybe I don't belong here after all. The silence that followed was a living thing. He stared at her, unreadable. Then, quietly, if you walk out that door, everything we built, everything you built, she corrected. And maybe that's the problem. She turned, moving toward the staircase. Amara. His voice stopped her. It wasn't commanding. It was broken. Don't go. She hesitated. The storm outside roared. The house groaned. Slowly, she looked back. Then tell me one thing. Tell me I matter more than the empire, more than the lies. He opened his mouth, but no words came. And that silence, that single, shattering silence, was her answer. She walked away. By dawn, the storm was gone. The river glimmered again, washed clean. But inside the glass house, everything had cracked. Dominic stood in her studio. The smell of paint lingered, sharp and human. Her brushes were gone. Her last canvas remained, the one she'd left unfinished. He stepped closer. In the swirl of color, he saw it now, two figures, facing each other through fractured glass. But this time, the glass wasn't breaking. It was already broken. He reached out, touching the paint, leaving a smear of color on his fingers. For the first time, the house felt smaller than the ache in his chest. Margaret appeared at the doorway, hesitant. "Sir, should I have her things sent somewhere?" Dominic's voice was quiet, hollow. "No." "Then what should I do?" He looked at the canvas again, eyes tracing the cracks of light within it. "Leave it," he said. "Let it remind me what I destroyed." Hours later, in a small studio on the edge of Brooklyn, Amara unpacked her paints. The walls were bare, the windows smudged, the air alive. She placed a single clean canvas on the easel. For a long time, she didn't move. Then she dipped her brush into red and began again, slower this time. Deliberate. Each stroke heavy with both grief and something else. Something that refused to die. Love. Even wounded. Had a heartbeat. And though she told herself she had left him behind, she knew deep down, beneath pride and pain, that their story was far from over. In the house of glass, Dominic Hayes stood alone before the painting, his reflection fractured by color. Outside, the sky cleared, a faint echo of dawn touching the edges of the horizon. He whispered her name once, so softly that even the house didn't hear. And somewhere miles away, in a studio washed with morning light, Amara's hand stilled mid-stroke as if she had. The city hadn't stopped moving, but everything inside Amara had. A week had passed since she left the glass house, yet its silence still clung to her like smoke. Even here in her Brooklyn studio with its cracked walls, uneven floors, and paint-splattered windows, she could still feel the ghost of his presence. Dominic Hayes had built himself into her heartbeat, and no amount of distance had exorcised him. Every morning, she told herself she wouldn't think of him. Every night, she broke that promise. The world outside didn't care about broken hearts. The story Elise had threatened never surfaced. Dominic must have buried it with money or fear, but the rumors lingered, reshaped, reprinted. The tabloids called her the artist who sold her soul for salvation. She didn't respond. She just painted, canvas after canvas, until her hands ached and her body trembled. But no matter how many colors she spilled, they all ended up forming the same thing, a shape, a shadow, a pair of eyes that haunted her even when closed. It was late when the doorbell rang. The knock wasn't loud, hesitant, almost uncertain. Amara froze. Brush midair. No one came here unannounced. She wiped her hands on a rag, crossed the room, and opened the door. Dominic stood there, rain-slicked and pale, like he'd been walking for miles. He wasn't in a suit this time, just a dark coat, Collar turned up, eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Her breath caught. You shouldn't be here. I know. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, two ghosts bound by memory. The rain hissed behind him, the city breathing like a living thing. What do you want? She asked finally. He didn't answer at once. His gaze drifted past her shoulder, into the studio. You've been painting. Is that why you came to audit my productivity? His jaw tightened. No. I came because I didn't know where else to go. Something inside her softened unwillingly, painfully. She stepped aside. Then come in before you drown. He hesitated, then entered. The studio seemed to shrink around him. He moved carefully, as if afraid to disturb the air. His eyes scanned the canvases that lined the walls, each one an explosion of emotion he had never learned to name. He stopped in front of the newest one. The colors were wild red, gold, violet, and in the center, a silhouette stood against a fractured horizon. It's you, he said quietly. It's not, she replied. It's what's left. He turned to her. Then what's left of me, Glass, she whispered, and maybe a heartbeat under it. If you'd stop being afraid to listen. Dominic took a slow breath. I thought I could protect you by keeping you out of the storm, but I became the storm instead. You didn't have to destroy everything to prove that, she said softly. I know. He looked away, shame flickering across his features. When you left, the house felt smaller, quieter. I thought I built it to contain the world. I didn't realize it was only ever holding me prisoner. She folded her arms, voice trembling. You can't come here expecting forgiveness. Dominic. I'm not, he said. I came to tell you the truth. She waited. Elise didn't stop because of the money. She stopped because she found something else. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? He hesitated. She found my father's letters, the ones about your father's debts. He wasn't supposed to be ruined. My father orchestrated it. He wanted me to marry you. The world tilted. What? He knew your family's vulnerability. He thought marrying you would soften my image, secure alliances, repair his reputation. Dominic's voice broke. He used you to fix me. The air left her lungs. So the marriage wasn't a choice. It was a transaction between two men. I didn't know, he said quickly. Not until after the wedding. I swear to you. Amara. I didn't. She laughed low, sharp, disbelieving. Of course you didn't. You never wanted to see what was real. You were too busy building perfect illusions. He took a step forward. I tried to make it right. By hiding it. By loving you. The words froze her. He said them without armor, without calculation. Just a truth laid bare in the wreckage. Amara stared at him, heart hammering. You don't get to say that now. I know, he whispered. But it doesn't make it less true. The rain outside softened to a whisper. Somewhere. A siren wailed and faded. I don't know what to do with you, she said quietly. You don't have to do anything. He looked at her, eyes heavy with regret. I'll fix what I can. The foundation, the lies, the damage. I just needed you to know the truth came from me, not from Elise, not from anyone else. She turned away, arms wrapped around herself. And then, what? You go back to your empire. Pretend this was another problem you solved. No. His voice was low. I go back to dismantle it. She turned. What I'm selling my shares. The board will survive without me. My father can choke on his own kingdom. He met her eyes. I'm done being a reflection of someone else's control. For the first time. She saw it not arrogance, but freedom flickering at the edges of him. And suddenly, she was terrified. Because if Dominic Hayes could walk away from his world, then maybe she had never really known where hers ended and his began. The rain stopped. The city stilled. He stepped closer, voice barely above a breath. When I built that house, I thought glass would protect me, but it just showed me everything I was afraid to feel. You made me see color again. Amara. And I don't know if I can live without it. Her eyes stung. You shouldn't ask me to forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. His hand trembled at his side. I'm asking for a chance to be someone worthy of you. The distance between them vanished in a heartbeat. She didn't remember moving, only the sudden nearness of him, the scent of rain and skin and regret. His hand lifted slowly, hesitating just inches from her face. May I? For a long moment. She couldn't speak. Then she nodded. Barely. His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle, reverent, like he was touching something sacred. Her breath caught. This is what I was afraid of, he whispered. What feeling alive? And then he kissed her. It wasn't the desperate kind of kiss born from guilt or need. It was quiet, slow, honest. It tasted of everything they'd broken and everything still worth saving. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. I don't deserve you, he said. Maybe not, she whispered. But for the first time, you're trying. That's a start. He left before sunrise. The studio smelled of him long after he was gone. On her table, she found an envelope. Inside, no money, no letter, only a small silver key and a note in his handwriting. For the studio that's ours now, not the house I built, but the one we'll build together. Amara pressed the key against her palm, feeling its weight simple, unadorned, real. For the first time in months, she smiled. Not because everything was healed, but because it wasn't. Because it was human. She turned to the canvas still drying by the window. The red had deepened overnight. The gold bled brighter. She picked up her brush, dipped it in white, and began painting again, slow, deliberate. Each stroke lighter than the last. Outside, the dawn was breaking, and somewhere beyond the river, in a house that no longer belonged to him, Dominic Hayes stood watching the same sunrise, whispering a name that had already remade him. In love's aftermath, there are no victors, only survivors who learn to build again. The end.